In the fall of 1965, the Rolling Stones found themselves overwhelmed in the midst of immense popularity of their hit single, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. They were glad for its success, to be sure, but the pressure to follow that accomplishment with another great track was mounting. In a remarkable feat, the band took that pressure and turned it into not only another number one hit, but one of their most lasting, popular tracks of their 50-plus year career. Get Off My Cloud. Hello there, it's Warren Hewitt here. I hope you're doing marvellously well. Welcome back to another episode of this series. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and if you hit the notification bell, you'll be notified when we have another new video. And if you're into production, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list, and you'll also get a whole bunch of free goodies. The Rolling Stones were formed in London in 1962, inspired by American blues and the early rock and roll records that came out of the late 50s. While Mick Jagger and Keith Richards had been childhood friends and classmates at Wentworth Primary School in Dartford, Kent in the early 50s, they had lost touch by the end of the decade. They reconnected, however, by a chance meeting at a train station in October of 1961. Richards recalled, "In a town like Dartford, if anybody's heading for London at any stop in between, then in Dartford Station you're bound to meet. The thing about Mick and my meeting was that he was carrying two albums with him, Rockin' at the Hops by Chuck Berry and The Best of Muddy Waters. I'd only heard about Muddy up to that point." The pair began talking about their shared musical interests, and Richards invited Jagger over for tea that afternoon. While they sat around listening to their favourite records, they soon realised they had a common friend in guitarist Dick Taylor, with whom Jagger had been playing in a garage band. So Jagger invited Richards to come join them. Their first band was Little Boy Blue and the Blues Boys, in which they mostly performed covers of artists like Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry and Little Richard. In 1962, the pair went to see Alexis Korner's band Blues Incorporated at the Ealing Club in London, where they witnessed for the first time the talents of guitarist Brian Jones. Richards, Jagger and Jones quickly became friends and musical partners, alongside Ian Stewart and Tony Chapman. They also were invited to jam alongside Korner's group, which had now secured a regular gig at the Marquee Club. While Korner had to cancel his slot one night, the nascent Rolling Stones stepped in. This first gig at the Marquee Club on July the 12th, 1962, featured Richards, Jagger, Jones, Taylor and Stewart, with a rumour that future Kinks band member Mick Avery also played drums. In these early gigs, they went by the name Brian Jones and Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones. By the end of 1962, Bill Wyman had replaced Taylor on bass. By early 1963, former Blues Incorporated drummer Charlie Watts had been convinced to join the group, creating the classic Stones lineup we all know. Gigging around the UK, the band quickly grew in popularity, and by May they had signed the young but ambitious Andrew Loog Oldham as their manager. The Stones were then signed by Dick Rowe to Decca Records. Rowe's reputation in the industry as the man who turned down the Beatles was turned around by a tip from George Harrison during a talent contest in which they were both judges. Harrison had heard the Stones perform at the Crawdaddy and encouraged Rowe to check them out. Rowe did just that, and the rest is history. Shortly thereafter, the band was in Olympic recording studios recording their first tracks. A cover of Chuck Berry's Come On was released as their debut single and reached 21 on the UK charts. Their next single, I Want to Be Your Man, was written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and this time they broke the UK top 20. Another cover followed, this time a Buddy Holly song, Not Fade Away. The band's popularity was steadily growing, and Not Fade Away hit number 3 in the UK. It was also their first US release, hitting number 48 on the Billboard Hot 100. Their first UK number 1 came next with the Bobby and Shirley Womack song, It's All Over Now. Time Is On My Side gave the band their first US top 10 hit. The Stones were clearly captivating audiences with their powerful performances and signature attitude, but they had yet to showcase their songwriting talents. Richards recalled in his autobiography that they didn't really find their confidence as songwriters until February 1965 with the single The Last Time. Mick and I knew by now that really our job was to write songs for the Stones. It took us 8-9 months before we came up with The Last Time, which is the first one that we felt we could give to the rest of the guys without being sent out of the room. If I'd gone to the Rolling Stones with As Tears Go By, it would have been Get Out and Don't Come Back. Mick and I were trying to hone it down. We kept coming up with these ballads, nothing to do with what we were doing. And then finally we came up with The Last Time and looked at each other and said, let's try this with the boys. The song was the first recognisable Stones riff or guitar figure on it. The chorus is from the Staple Singers version, This May Be the Last Time. We could work the hook. Now we had to find the verse. It had a Stones twist to it, one that maybe couldn't have been written earlier. A song about going on the road and dumping some chick. You don't try very hard to please me. Not the usual serenade to the unattainable object of desire. That was when it really clicked. With that song, when Mick and I felt confident enough to actually lay it down in front of Brian and Charlie, and Ian Stewart especially, arbiter of events. With those earlier songs, we would have been chased out of the room. But that song defined us in a way, and it went to number 1 in the UK. A follow-up did even better, giving the band their first international hit, and undoubtedly remains one of their most iconic tracks, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. The band's popularity had been steadily growing up until this point, but Satisfaction elevated the band to an entirely different level. Richards recalled, then we were on a roller coaster. I remember after Satisfaction, there was this time of great triumph, a worldwide hit. Mick and I were sitting in some motel room in San Diego. If I remember rightly, we gave a big sigh of relief, and it was exactly at that moment that there was a knock at the door and the phone started ringing and people wanted the next hit. The follow-up single would take that pressure and turn it into a massive hit with lots of attitude. Get Off My Cloud. Get Off My Cloud was written by Jagger and Richards in response to the overwhelming success of Satisfaction and the pressure to follow up with another hit. Get Off My Cloud was basically a response to people knocking on our door asking for us to follow up with Satisfaction, which was such an enormous hit worldwide. This to us was mind-blowing. I mean, not only was it a number 1 hit record, but boom! We thought, at last, we can sit back and maybe think about events. Suddenly there's a knock at the door, and of course, what came out of that was Get Off My Cloud. Because within 3 weeks in those days, hey, they want another single. And we weren't quite ready for that. So it was our response to the knock at the door, Get Off of My Cloud. And I'm surprised that it did so well. I mean, it has a certain charm, but I remember it being a knee-jerk reaction. And it came out better than I thought. Jagger called it a Stop Bugging Me post-teenage alienation song, in response to the restrictive society of the 60s. The lyrics to the chorus absolutely capture that frustration. The verse lyrics are really interesting for the way they are so accessible. Like the verses in Satisfaction, we have a series of little vignettes of frustration. I sit at home looking out the window, imagining the world has stopped. Then in flies a guy who's all dressed up like a Union Jack and says, I've won £5 if I have this kind of detergent pack. Later in the second verse, he's receiving a noise complaint. The telephone is ringing, I say. Hi, it's me. Who is there on the line? A voice says, hi, hello, how are you? Well, I guess I'm doing fine. He says, it's 3 a.m. There's too much noise. Don't you people ever want to go to bed just because you feel so good? Do you have to drive me out of my head? The verses are not necessarily the complaints of rock stars, although the noise complaint certainly fits the bill. Instead, they are frustrations of everyday life, frustrations that their fans could relate to. Advertisements and solicitations, noise complaints and parking violations. The song opens with Charlie Watts' iconic drums. They set the tone and illustrate this classic sound. Watts had learned his technique observing the world of jazz, the records of Thelonius Monk, Jelly Roll Morton and Charlie Parker. Inspired by the drumming of Chico Hamilton, who had played with Charlie Mingus and Dexter Gordon, Watts had created his first snare drum out of a banjo head. I wanted to play like that with brushes. I didn't have a snare drum, so I put the banjo head on a stand. Get Off My Cloud may not employ that brush drum sound, but it does perfectly illustrate the elegant swing of his heavy pulse.
Hi, here we're taking a look at Charlie Watts' drumming on Get Off My Cloud. And there's an element to this which makes it quite unique and also an integral part of the track. The pattern itself is a 2-bar pattern in 4/4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you'll notice at the end of that second bar, we've got that 2-beat figure or fill. Nothing unusual about that, other than the fact that normally a fill, 2 beats or perhaps 4 beats long, would normally mark the transition into another section, perhaps from the verse into a chorus. But in this instance, it actually just gets repeated every 2 bars, and it actually forms a hook within the track, whether you're aware of that consciously or unconsciously. And you'll also notice when you listen to the piece again, how it sort of interacts with the vocal as well. So a verse line from the verse finishes, and there's that fill each time. The other element that is key to it is that it's a 2-beat fill, and there are lots of different fills that could be played as a 2-beat fill, for example. But instead of changing the 2-beat fill, it's always that same 2-beat figure played on the snare drum. And so there are 2 elements of repetition there. We've got the repetition of a 2-beat fill every 2 bars, but it's also the fact that it's the same 2-beat fill every 2 bars. So if someone was to ask you to play the groove from Get Off My Cloud, it wouldn't just be this. It would have that fill every 2 bars because the fill is part of the groove and ultimately it's part of the track.
The song relies on the same guitar riff-based formula as Satisfaction, as does The Last Time. All 3 are riff-based songs that are propelled forward by Watts' energetic groove. The twin guitars are played by Jones and Richards, further establishing what we now hear as the iconic Stone sound. If you listen carefully, you can hear Ian Stewart's subtle piano lines alongside the rhythm guitar. I think that was just a matter of saying, Stu, this sounds a bit thin. Can you just play a little piano under it? That was just one of those things that you could do in those days, shadow a guitar with a piano. As long as you didn't make it obvious, it would add some different air to the track. Because it was all 4-track at the time. Basically, you had to get it in the room. There was no, what if we overdubbed added violins? The only choice was to decide whether you got it or if you had to do another take. Get Off My Cloud was recorded at RCA Studios in Hollywood on September the 6th and 7th, 1965. RCA's original location had been near NBC Studios since 1959, but by April of 1964, the studio had moved to its new location on Sunset Boulevard, where it remained until the late 70s. This was the space in which the Rolling Stones would record many of their classic tracks, as would Jefferson Airplane, The Grateful Dead, Eartha Kitt, Elvis Presley, and Henry Mancini. Get Off My Cloud was produced by Oldham, with Dave Hassinger as the engineer. The sessions were quick, trying to capitalize on the band's immediate popularity. The track was released only a few weeks later on September the 25th in the US and October the 25th in the UK. It immediately became a hit, topping the Billboard Hot 100 on November the 5th, 1965. It also held the #1 spot in the UK, Canada, and Germany, and the #2 spot in several other countries, including Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, Norway, and the Netherlands. It remained a hit, a staple of classic rock radio, and a beloved classic for generations. In 1989, the Stones were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and they remain active performers to this day. As one of the band's biggest hits, along with Satisfaction, Get Off My Cloud helped establish the Rolling Stones' legacy as rock's original bad boys, and certainly one of the biggest and longest-lasting bands in rock history. Now, obviously, we have to talk about the fact that we recently lost Charlie Watts. I feel blessed that I have seen the Stones play, I was trying to think about this the other day, 10 or 12 times. I saw them when I was 15 on Still Life tour, or was I 14? I was super young. I saw them on Urban Jungle and Steel Wheels, which I believe was the same tour that came through twice, multiple times. Every time I saw them, actually, was at Wembley. And me and my friend John, if you're watching, I think we saw them 3 or 4 times at Wembley, like 2 nights in a row, a night off, and then a night again. It was amazing. They're one of my favorite bands. They're one of many people's favorite bands. We lost Charlie, and it's pretty huge. I can't imagine the Stones without him. You know, as Pete was talking about earlier, the way that Charlie would play by not playing the hi-hat and the snare was actually welcomed by engineers. Engineers liked the fact that they could get a clean snare hit without the hi-hat bleeding in. And he's talked about that, and it's part of his technique and something that's so unique to him. But it's more than that. If you hear the solo drums on any Stones song, it has that perfect combination between feel and being tight. It seems to groove and just like make you just kind of want to move to the music. But at the same time, he's a machine. He's a machine with feel. I don't know if there's a better drummer, especially for a rhythm and blues rock band from Britain. I think Charlie's understanding of jazz and blues was just like next level. We've got to remember that in the early 60s, pop music was big, but it wasn't the predominant music. Jazz in the 50s and the early 60s was still absolutely massive. So these guys, which are sort of my parents and generation, would have grown up listening to jazz all around them. And there was Charlie absorbing the greatest jazz musicians, the greatest jazz drummers, and bringing it into an R&B, pop, rock, blues feel. He is ridiculously special as a drummer. And I think as Pete was talking about, this is a hook. This part in the song is a hook of the song. Charlie, we miss you. I'm so glad I got to see you play. I even saw the big band at Ronnie Scott's. Absolutely amazing. Charlie, we owe you so much. Thanks ever so much for watching. Please leave any comments and questions below. Let us know what you think of this song, or what songs you would like us to feature in the future. Thank you ever so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a marvelous time. Speak to you all again soon. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, tschüss, goodbye.